What up, it's Prime Pete. I went through the pain of switching from controller to keyboard and mouse, but this video can be used just the same if you want to quickly improve your aim. I was a controller player who was not that good at aiming, and I saw the crazy potential that mouse aiming had to offer, and so I went from a controller player with inconsistent aim to a full-time keyboard and mouse player that hits a very high majority of my shots. And using this method and knowledge, I trained 30 minutes a day for 3 weeks and have barely trained since, and people still think I'm using an aimbot. I love these comments, by the way. So how did I do it? Well, after lots of research, I've discovered that aiming is a concept that is widely overcomplicated by YouTubers and professional gamers alike. While I've found useful information scouring the web for advice, generally copying someone else's routines and settings is, for the most part, a horrible idea, as you need to tailor your mindset and practice toward your own needs, not someone else's, even if they're an insanely good player. This video is different from my normal commentary about Call of Duty and other games, but it's still going to be just as informative, so stick around if you want to improve, and I'm going to be going back to my commentary in my next video. Before I start, if you only want the quick list of things I did to get better and not the in-depth explanations, though I recommend listening to them, skip to the timestamp on the screen. But as I said, it's best you listen to the explanations to get a grasp on what you need to do. That being said, here we go. In this video, I will teach you the facts and fundamentals about improving your aim and how to neurologically and based on science improve your aim as quickly as possible, utilizing a concept I like to call aim fluency. And the opposite of aim fluency is aim consistency. Think about it in terms of speaking a language. Fluency is being able to speak any and every sentence that you want to speak with no difficulty. Consistency, the way I mean it here, is only being able to speak one sentence or about one topic really well, but having no ability to say anything else. So how does this relate to aiming? Well, aim fluency is the ability to aim very well with any sensitivity that you need, and aim consistency is being able to aim well with only one sensitivity. Obviously, fluency is a more desirable skill, but you're probably saying, well, Pete, that takes a lot more time than just learning one sensitivity. And this would make sense, but what if I told you that despite it sounding more difficult, achieving aim fluency is actually much easier than achieving consistency with one sensitivity? Let me explain. There are two forms of aiming: wrist aiming and arm aiming. Wrist aiming is done by pivoting at the wrist, and arm aiming is done by pivoting at your elbow and moving your forearm. Wrist aiming is, by general consensus, mostly used for more precise aiming and covering shorter distances. However, players who use very high sensitivities rarely use arm aiming because the motions used in arm aiming are far too large to be effective at a high sensitivity. On the flip side, players who use very low sensitivities use their arm a high percentage of the time. So what happens when we train only with one sensitivity is we're training only one muscle group, either the wrist area or the arm area, meaning the other group is going to be completely untrained and untouched. We do not want this, because being able to utilize all of the possible aiming muscle groups is your best bet at achieving aim fluency. And surprisingly, training all of your muscle groups at the same time actually will make you improve significantly faster in your preferred sensitivity area than if you were to only train with one sensitivity. All that being said, let's dive in, and I hope you're ready to improve. Let's talk about your mindset before we dive into the physical concepts of aiming. To start off, I want to stress very strongly that improving your aim is not difficult. It just requires a little consistency and time. People often confuse the time commitment with difficulty, but I'm here to tell you that's not the case. Watching players like Shroud and Tens blaze through aim training and hit super precise headshots can make you marvel at their ability and wonder how much time and energy they have put into improving their aim. While they are professionals and they have a lot more time in their hands than we often do to practice, I'm here to tell you that being able to do grid shot faster than the Flash can run to his neighbor's house is not necessarily going to make you good at aiming within a particular game. That being said, take a moment to rein yourself in and not overcomplicate it in your brain, because let's face it, if you're new to aiming on your particular platform, you're most likely going to suck at it for a couple sessions, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Take another second to really reiterate that to yourself. There is nothing wrong with being bad at first. It's extremely unrealistic to assume you're going to be amazingly good at something new the instant you pick it up. Where most people quit transitioning to keyboard and mouse from controller is when they realize that their performance is horrendous compared to their performance on controller, and they don't think it's worth it to switch platforms if they're going to suck at the game for an extended period, so they switch back. Unfortunately, I did this 4 times before I officially switched over for good. This is the wrong mindset, and take it from me, sticking with it even though I sucked at it was one of the best choices I ever made regarding improvement at video games. Sacrificing a week or two's worth of games to massively improve your aim is absolutely a good sacrifice to make, and I guarantee you that you will not regret it. If you're just a keyboard player by default but you want to improve your aim, don't worry. These next sections apply to everybody, those who are transitioning and those who've used a mouse to aim for a while. Now to cover the physical concept of aim. Aiming at the very core is all about muscle memory, the occurrence in which you perform actions without consciously thinking about them. Physically aiming at a target directly relates to your arm's positioning and movement in real life. Having proper aiming muscle memory means your brain is able to precisely dictate the distance your hand or arm needs to travel to align your reticle with the target. That being said, think about how many things in your life you already use muscle memory for. Walking, running, playing a sport, talking, heck, typing on a keyboard. Your brain is built for muscle memory. In fact, most of the things you do throughout your day are unconscious and habitual. Human beings are born to tackle things subconsciously. Your goal is to take the skill of aiming and focus on it consciously enough to eventually make it an unconscious action. And this is much easier than it sounds, especially by utilizing the tricks and concepts I'm about to show you. Now keep in mind, in order to build the skill to the point of muscle memory, you need to consciously think about it long enough until it becomes unconscious. To simply put how the brain learns new skills, basically when you're learning them at first, you're using what's called the prefrontal cortex. It's a part of your brain in the very front. This is the part of the brain you use to consciously think about every action that you're doing. But as you become more proficient in the skill that you're performing, these behaviors shift to the hippocampus, or where your memories are stored. And interestingly, this explains why people who are extremely good at something still sometimes choke under pressure. When you overthink skills that you've memorized, you're using the wrong part of your brain that these skills are not stored in. For example, if a professional player is overthinking their aim and movement, they're actually focusing consciously on these things, which means they're using their prefrontal cortex to perform these actions. But these actions are stored in the hippocampus, so these skills will not be recalled correctly. Our goal is to exploit this learning process and accelerate it by using these tricks. Before I dive in, please note that in order to improve quickly, just playing a game is not enough. You'll need to download third-party software that is specifically designed to improve your aim, like AimLabs or Kovacs. AimLabs is what I used, and it's free on Steam. I'll link it in the description. Now, here are the overlooked methods that are actually extremely effective at improving aim. By far the most useful method of practice that took my aim from mediocre to accused of aimbot was using what's called a sensitivity randomizer. And it is exactly what it sounds like. You can program AimLabs to do this by going into your settings, turning on the sensitivity randomizer, and inputting these settings shown here. If you need to, pause the video and copy these down. Full credit goes to the YouTuber West Proder for these ranges. He was actually the one who informed me of this method. His full video on sensitivity randomizers and his channel will be in the description. Wes Proder is a phenomenal aimer and aim coach for pro players, and he is a highly credible source. What a sensitivity randomizer essentially does is it changes your sensitivity every couple of seconds to a wide variety of different sensitivities, some requiring wrist aiming or aiming only with your wrists. These are typically high sensitivities, and arm aiming or aiming with larger arm movements. These are typically low sensitivities. This is your first step to getting better. If you are at beginner mouse aiming level and you train your brain to be somewhat fluent with all different kinds of sensitivities, you'll not only be activating and stimulating more of your brain to wrap around the muscle memory involved with this practice, you will also be able to, in the near future, adapt to other sensitivities if a game requires more precision or a faster pace of play. It's like using weighted shoes for running. When game time comes around, you take them off and it feels much easier to run in a state where you are comfortable, even though that is the norm. Getting used to all different kinds of sensitivities and activating every muscle in your arm while you're aim training speeds up your improvement in game once you're using your real preferred sensitivity. That being said, in training with a randomizer, don't worry about underperforming or not placing high in the leaderboards. Even if you're placing in the top 50%, you're doing better than half of the players on AimLabs using their preferred sensitivity while you're using every sensitivity under the sun. I consider that a win. So after applying a sensitivity randomizer, the second thing you have to add is pressure to your practice. Just practicing and not rewarding or punishing yourself when you succeed or fail is actually a decelerated process compared to when you're practicing with pressure. Since there are no real-life stakes in video games, you have to give yourself some kind of pressure. Something to dread if you fail. Neurologically, your brain learns and adapts to new circumstances faster if there is a fear of discomfort or some kind of pressure associated with the action in practice. If you were just practicing aim nonchalantly and made a mistake or missed a lot of shots with no repercussions, science says you're much more likely to repeat this mistake again. When you add pressure to your routines, you're much more likely to improve because you're cognitively dreading the punishment if you fail. It's negative reinforcement. I did two things when I was training at first. First, when I trained in AimLabs, every target I missed at the end of my attempt was one push-up. This made me want to hit my targets far more and forced me to consciously think about when I was pulling the trigger, and I gained some muscle out of it, so it's a win-win. Another thing you could do is get a food or drink you really don't like and eat it every time you miss a certain amount of shots, or however many times you miss in one attempt. What I also did was hop into a bot lobby. I did this in Modern Warfare, but any FPS bot lobby you can set up will work. I used my preferred sensitivity and set the bots to the lowest difficulty and made them have 150% to 300% of their normal health. If I A, missed missed 3 to 5 opening shots on the bot, or B, lost a firefight to a bot, I would get up from my chair and do 5 push-ups. Then, at the end of the game, do a push-up for every death. I would play until I got 50 kills. Not only does this simulate a real match in the game you want to improve at, it also adds pressure to your routine and forces your brain to adapt much faster than if you were just casually practicing. It makes you wait to fire and make sure you're actually on target with your reticle before you pull the trigger. It gives you true discipline over your aim. My ultimate point is that pressure is scientifically proven to make you learn and adapt faster, and it also boosts and improves focus during your training routine because you have far more of an incentive to succeed in your endeavors. These two concepts, using a sensitivity randomizer and applying real legitimate pressure to yourself when aiming, are the two biggest accelerants when it comes to learning the skill of aiming. However, you're only a portion of the way there. Aiming is a concept as much as it is a physical muscular skill. Next, we'll cover the mental concepts of aiming and what you need to keep in mind when playing and practicing. First, something you've probably heard about a lot is your crosshair placement. Now, most YouTubers tend to over or undercomplicate this topic. This concept cannot be overlooked due to how vastly it affects your performance in third and first person shooters. Crosshair placement is where your crosshair is when you're not firing your weapon. In other words, it is where you're aiming when you're not engaging in a firefight or pulling the trigger. You want to have your crosshair in the most likely place an enemy will come from at any given moment, so you have to work significantly less to hit the shot. The easier the target is to hit and react to, the more likely you will win the firefight. Another very important tidbit of information is that you do not want your crosshair to be touching the ground at all. You want it perfectly straight ahead. Players who have this habit find it tough to break it first, but it's very important, and it's to ensure that you're hitting all your shots in the head or upper body, as leg shots deal notoriously less damage than shots straight to the head or chest. Consciously focus on removing this habit while you are training. Players with good crosshair placement improve two things about their overall game. First, they improve their reaction time. Why? Because when their crosshair is centered on a place where the enemy will most likely appear, they do not have to rely on their peripheral vision. The instant the target rears its head, they're able to react, as opposed to if the target appears in their peripheral vision. Studies show that your reaction time slows down by 100 or more milliseconds when something appears in your peripheral vision. While that might seem insignificant, in a shooter, that easily means life or death, especially considering some of the times to kill we see on certain guns in certain games. You might even be able to beat a player with peeker's advantage just because you have superior crosshair placement. The second thing that good crosshair placement improves is your accuracy. The less distance you have to move your crosshair, the more accurate your shots will be. While this is obvious, it's nonetheless extremely important to note. Some of you may ask, well, Pete, how do I exactly know where to place my crosshair at any given time? Well, first and foremost, you need some form of map knowledge. And if you lack map knowledge, just use your intuition and put yourself in the enemy's shoes. Ask yourself, if I wanted to kill me right now from somewhere else, where would I peek from to make sure I wouldn't die? Another extremely important tip for good crosshair placement is to be constantly moving your crosshairs to different possible places the enemy might peek from to cover all of the possible options. Here's an example on the classic map Nuketown. A player can peek from all of these places, and you might think, well, that's a lot of places, and it is, but practice flicking your reticle to each place one at a time. If you're lucky enough to catch somebody at the right time, you've secured yourself a kill. If not, you're just covering yourself in case you get jumped by an opponent trying to surprise you. If you are running through an area where you could be shot from the sides or above, move your crosshair to each of the places someone could peek from to shoot you. One sweep is enough. 2 is fantastic. The thing about arcade shooters is that lots of occurrences are just unlucky. If an opponent jumps out the minute you look away from somewhere, it's just unlucky, not a skill issue. You won't always be rewarded for covering every single possible angle, but most of the time you will be. The hardest thing about crosshair placement, both keeping it at chest level or head level in some shooters like Valorant and CSGO, or pre-aiming in places you think enemies will appear, is not the act itself. It is cognitively training and forcing yourself to do it. When you play on autopilot, your brain becomes complacent to what is going on around you, and you're much more prone to being shot from areas around you versus when you're forcing yourself to focus on where you're aiming, even while not shooting at all times, which is what you should do. Training good crosshair placement is as simple as finding areas where enemies will peek from and preemptively putting your crosshairs there to anticipate their peek. Here are 2 super easy rules to keep in mind. If you're moving around, don't spend too long on each angle. Less than half a second for each is ideal. If you're static, perhaps expecting a peek or watching a bomb site, follow the 2-second rule. If you pre-aim a potential peek spot for 2 seconds and no one shows up, readjust your aim to the next possible place. You can go back and forth between multiple places if there are only a few obvious angles. The next mental concept that is highly important to improving your aim and can actually yield instant results is actually looking at your target. And that sounds really dumb and obvious, like of course you have to look at your target when you aim. But what if I told you that that most players actually are not actively looking at or tracking their target with their eyes. See, most of the time, players will see their target once, adjust their aim to be on them, then fire and not pay attention to how the target is moving. Sometimes they'll even fire when they aren't on the target at all. This skill is absolutely crucial to improving your aim. Consciously force your eyes to constantly be on the target at all times, and keep your reticle centered with your eyes and the target. This will dramatically improve your hand-eye coordination and target acquisition abilities. If the target shifts slightly, make sure you're actively tracking it with your eyes so your aim can readjust the amount it needs to land enough shots. This is the key to taking down strafing enemies, or enemies who are moving horizontally across your screen to try to avoid getting shot while shooting you. One more tip about this: you don't need to nerd neck or squint and focus super hard on the target to do this. Just relax your eyes, but make sure they're consciously focusing on the target at all times. To go along with this is another very important concept you have to consider: how players move in the games you're playing. For example, a game like Fortnite, when you're firing at players, they typically will jump a lot to try to avoid being hit, and make quick editing plays or build cover to avoid taking damage. As a good aimer in Fortnite, you have to be aware of what movements Fortnite players make. Most notably, I'm pre-aiming through buildings when I'm expecting them to make an edit, which is good crosshair placement, and I'm expecting them to jump when I fire at them, making it much easier to track them when I anticipate their movement. In games like Halo, I expect to be tracking players through long flight paths in the air, given their movement options. In Splitgate, I expect to flick around a lot because players can quickly teleport from one place to another. In COD, I usually expect jumping and strafing from enemy players. The next thing I want to talk about is what to focus on a little bit more than other things. This comes in two forms: what your weaknesses are and what game you're playing. Obviously, the first thing to do is assess your weaknesses. Be honest with yourself. Is flicking onto targets your Achilles heel, or is tracking the bane of your existence? Or are both weak for you? Focus on training your weaknesses to be on par with your strengths. As far as areas of aiming go, in my opinion, there are four main areas of aiming that branch out into all the sub areas. Flicking, the ability to very quickly adjust your reticle to be on the target. Tracking, the ability to accurately follow a moving target. Precision, the ability to hit smaller or harder to hit and track objects. And crosshair placement, which we just covered. Everything else is a subcategory of these four things. Which is your weakest? Second, assess the game you're playing. Rank the main concepts from most to least prevalent for whatever title you're playing. For example, if I were playing Call of Duty or Halo, or other arena shooters, I'd likely rank them crosshair placement, tracking, flicking, then precision. In a game like Valorant or CSGO, it's crosshair placement, precision, flicking, then tracking. Crosshair placement, if you noticed, will generally stay on top, because your performance will skyrocket once the skill improves. So when developing a routine and practicing, make sure you evaluate what skills will actually benefit you over other players. Now you've got all the concepts you need to know to effectively practice. So far, we've discussed using a sensitivity randomizer and training with third-party software, training with pressure, good crosshair placement, assessing your weaknesses, and figuring out what your game requires the most of in regards to the different areas of aiming. Now we can talk about a routine. I got way better in just 3 weeks of training 30 minutes a day. If you can commit to this and not miss a day, you will 100% see improvement in your game. Set up a time to train and stick with it. What you need to do is practice all the concepts of aiming while prioritizing the ones you need the most. Also, set up a graph with your scores to track your improvement. Make one column for the type of exercise, one column for your first score, and one for your high score. Write down the first score you get without warming up, and then the score you're most confident about in that session as your high score for the day. Try to beat both of these the next day you train. Keep in mind, this is all going to be done with a sensitivity randomizer. You can choose whatever activities you want, but I recommend the following because they effectively train every aspect of your aim. They are grid shot, spider shot, strafe track, bounce track, circle track, switch track, which is my personal favorite, micro shot, spider shot precision, and sniper shot. Prioritize or heavily repeat the areas that influence the game you're currently training for the most. Punish yourself lightly for every shot you miss by the end of it, like having to do a push-up or eat or drink something you don't like, to add the pressure we discussed earlier. One good tip is that for any activity where you have to flick to and shoot multiple targets in quick succession, you use a metronome and gradually ramp up the speed every time you do well. Just turning on Google's built-in metronome or listening to one on a phone or speaker will do the trick. Start very slow, around 70 BPM, and crank it up by 5 BPM whenever you think you can move on. Every time the metronome clicks, shoot a target. Then, for the final couple attempts, go as fast as you possibly can without a metronome. Next, set up a bot lobby in whatever game you're training for, and using your preferred sensitivity, focus on hitting your shots and killing the bots. Punish yourself for either losing a firefight with a bot or missing too many initial shots by doing any of the things mentioned earlier or your own idea. Still, add pressure. Then, you're done. If you have more time than 30 minutes, you can spend longer doing any of these things. The more you train, the quicker your brain will adapt. Remember, precise aim is muscular, with mental aspects like good crosshair placement and actually following your target with your eyes. Being a good aimer takes not only a trained arm, but a trained mind as well. It's not difficult to do this because, again, your brain is built for muscle memory. Lastly, patience, patience, patience. You are probably going to suck for your first week or so. Take pride in the fact that you are failing purposely for the sake of getting better. What is on the other side of your training is far better than how you were performing before your training. It's okay to mess up. And sometimes you'll have to turn off your emotions to avoid getting tilted during this process. Take pride in knowing that you're performing and doing what a lot of players don't want to spend time doing. And another amazing phenomenon of the human body is how your brain further enhances, imprints, and memorizes things you did and learned throughout your day while you're asleep. So even if you don't see massive improvements across one session, once you sleep on it, I guarantee you that you will wake up much better than you were the day before, purely because your brain formed new connections while you were asleep. All the more reason not to give up. Whew, that was a lot to cover. Let's recap everything we learned very quickly. First, use a sensitivity randomizer whenever you train with third-party software to maximize the information your brain is learning towards the muscle memory of aiming. The more sensitivities you train at, the more effective you will be at aiming with your preferred sensitivity, or the sensitivity that is most effective for a certain title. Second, always put pressure on yourself when you train to encourage more effective focus and learning. Third, focus on your crosshair placement when you are playing and training. Fourth, train in third-party software with each fundamental area of aiming. Fifth, add extra priority to your weak areas and areas of the game that you're playing that require the most focus, like Valorant's precision or Halo's tracking. And sixth, remember that sucking at first is part of the process. To put my bit about a sensitivity randomizer simply for those of you who skipped, a randomizer improves your muscle memory in multiple muscle groups faster, which means faster improvement. And adding pressure to your routine scientifically speeds up your learning process as well. The routine at its most basic form, recapped, is this. For 15 minutes, use aim labs and run through about 8 different aim exercises with a sensitivity randomizer, prioritizing your weak areas and areas specific to the game you're playing. Then, for another 15 minutes, hop into a bot lobby in the game of your choice on your preferred sensitivity and kill bots with extra health and with extreme discipline over crosshair placement, tracking with your eyes, and trigger discipline. If you have extra time, double down on either of these practices. Then just play the game you're training for however long you want, but still consciously pay attention to your crosshair placement and eye tracking. Remember, aim is a muscular skill that can be learned just like any other skill, and soon enough, you'll get reported for aimbotting too. Feel free to do any more research you need about improving your aim. This is just how I improved really fast. Also, check out Wes Proter's channel. He's by far the best aim coach I've ever heard talk about aiming. Other than that, stay positive, stay consistent, and practice. Take it easy.